Peace and power. Peace and power. Let those who have one shirt sell one and buy a sword. For those who have two shoes, they must sell one and buy a sword, because now is a time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on streets. This revolution is no longer on social media. This revolution is in the mind. Peace and power to you, Black family. It's a pleasure to find you here again. As always, first of all, it has been quite a long time since last we had a chat, we had a talk, with this kind of our weekly shows. So today it's a pleasure to find you here again with a very interesting topic that I'm willing to discuss in the next 20 minutes. And we look forward to our training session that starts today. Yeah, ACUP is progressive. ACUP is growing. Altogether with the free-minded, as we're speaking today, we will start our training session with the free-minded. Initially, free-minded is an academy for future African leaders in politics and business, but today the training start today. For the 4 next weeks, the training will be focused mainly on the ideology of the ACUP, because people cannot embark in something they don't understand. People have to understand the ideology of the ACUP so that we have constructive interaction, and we probably can expect some good results with what we do in the ACUP. When people don't understand the ideology, when people don't understand why we are here, well, the movement is likely to fail in the future. So please tune in today, go through our social media and find the link to the training session that is starting today, and register, join the training session so that you can understand what is the ideology of ACUP, and eventually we'll give you a certificate after the training about the ideology, and you probably might become the one who can represent the party and also implement the free-minded in your country, in your community, because we need this. We need this. So as I was saying, revolution is no longer on the streets. Revolution is now in the mind, because if what is happening here is not correct, nothing we do with our hands cannot be correct either. In other words, if we are unable to change what is happening in the minds of the people, or to state it differently, if we are unable to see the world differently and to look at ourselves differently, we will also be unable to change significantly things in our lives. That is why revolution cannot be merely on streets, and this time revolution is in the mind. And how do we going to achieve this? We are going to achieve this by producing new leaders in Africa that will be that will be fed, that will be trained to understand and to be in touch with the African reality. Because the challenge that we're having today, which is the topic of today's message that I want to discuss quickly, the challenge that we have today is the education that we are receiving. You see, there are two fundamental things that every education must provide for every person. And one thing is, the education should be able to teach a person about his environment or her environment. And second thing is that the education should be able to provide the tools that the person needs in order to affect his or her environments. So when people get to be, get trained in Eurocentric educational system that are not in touch with the African environment, that particular person will not gonna be fit to solve the African problem. And this has been the challenge, whether we acknowledge it or we understand it, unless we come up with an Afrocentric education that really reconnects people with their environment and also provide the tools that can help people to interact with their environment. From that moment, we'll see Africa, Africans emerging as great businessmen and great politicians. Because when you study, you know, at the Cambridge University, which has been where the curriculum is designed by people who don't know the African environment, and people who probably they don't even want to see Africa developing, they cannot teach you, they cannot connect you to your environment. One thing that I want to say that is very important: culture is the language that people use to communicate with their environment. That is what culture is. It can be defined in in many ways, because it can mean different things to different people. But one of the ways that we can explain the culture is that it's a language of universe and its people. So it's only education that reconnects you to your culture that will enable you to understand your environment and to apply certain knowledge and wisdom that you have learned in that education so that you can change your environment. But as long as we are being educated to be like Europeans, or to be like little French or little British and little Portuguese, we will not gonna be able to change Africa. Therefore, the Free-Minded Academy has been, has been brought into existence just to fill that gap where people now are more connected to technologies rather than to their environment. But when you have a problem, where do you go? When you have a situation that need to be fixed, all the solutions cannot be found on the internet, on technologies. Environment is what provide all the solutions that we need, because wherever you need a job, your environment should be able to provide a job. When you need, I don't know, food, it's your environment, it's not technology. When you need water, it's your environment, it's not technology. So you need education that reconnects you to your environment, that links you to your environment so that you can understand your environment, and the education that provides you with with the skills and the tools that can help you to affect your environment in a way that will be positive to your life. Now, what I'm going to talk today is that the challenge that we have had with Eurocentric education is because they are the educational systems, or they are the education form of educations that are designed to only develop your self identity. When you go to into our traditional educational institutions, you go to your high school and you go to university, all that you do is to improve your own your own identity, your personal identity. And when you're done with that education, you get a job somewhere. It's all about improving yourself. That is why in a Eurocentric thinking process, we have what we call social classes, where you have the upper class, you have the middle class, and you have the lower class, or the working class. So that is what the Eurocentric education does mostly, is to obviously get you improved in a way that you can fit in a particular social class that exists in your in your society. Where if you were a lower class, you then have to be improved so that you can fit in the middle class. So it's all about building yourself, building your self identity, and we have come to define success on that basis, where we see success as getting a good job, getting a social status that is public and respected by most of people, and then being known, by the public, and obviously living in a good suburb and driving nice car, and having all these things that technology is obviously bringing to our side, and the media is bringing to our side every day. This has become the standard of success, and somewhere somehow we are all struggling to get these things and to improve our personal identity. However, this is the thing: when you die, your identity dies with you. When you die, your identity becomes becomes ineffective and becomes obviously uh, unproductive. It cannot affect people's lives. It cannot change a situation in your community. It cannot change the situation in your, in your society. You die and your identity dies with you. Whatever status that you had in a society dies with you. That is what happened when we die. However, when we focus not in building self identity but building only institutions, we will be able to succeed in Africa. And for that to happen, we must now embrace a different education that teach us how to build institutions rather than building self-identity. Because this thing of building the self-identity is good, but more focus on it, we become now alienated from the traditional or the tradition and the culture that we used to have as African people. Because remember, as African people, we have for a long time, before Europeans came into existence, we have for a long time operated or functioned, in a system that is today called Ubuntu, where society is organized in a way that you live because I live and I live because you live. And we do things together, we do things collectively in order to affect our situation also collectively. But now, when you go into European institutions, as I've just said, it's all about man for himself and God for all of us. So the M in those institutions, in Eurocentric thinking processes, all about the man for himself. It's not about us as a community. That is why we have a tendency in this world to see one or single individuals able to have more wealth than the half of the of the global society. That is the philosophy of Eurasian people. But we as Ubuntu people, is always about us as a society. So what I'm trying to say, let's bring it back to the Kemetic. And I borrowed this concept from the African organic paradigm. And I shout out to them for their good works they do, which they do. In the Kemetic, Egypt, for example, in ancient Egypt, we know little about people that existed there, but we know much about institutions which they have laid down, which Greeks had to borrow, which Romans had to borrow, which European people today are using and calling their own institutions. And we know all these notions of life have emerged from Egypt. However, most of people who have participated in the building of those strong Egyptian institutions, we don't know much about them, which means that they were not much inclined in the construction of their identities, because they are dead as we're speaking, and their identities cannot do anything, to change your life and to change my life. Whether we talk about Imhotep cannot do anything today to change, is that identity of Imhotep cannot do anything significantly to change the African conditions. When we talk about pharaohs, all those pharaohs, or when we talk about Ptahutah, their identities cannot affect you and I today as we're speaking. However, the knowledge they laid down, the institutions of power which they left behind them, is what's still affecting the world today, and is what can still influence our thinking process, so that we can now rethink again as African people and decide where we are supposed to go with our lives. When we go to Egypt today, or we go in Sudan or some other places around Africa, we see all these pyramids. It tells us something. All these pyramids tells us something. These are erected stones that our ancestors left for us as a symbol of elevation and civilization. So the question is, today as African people, what are we willing to lay down for the next generations? What are we able to hand over to the people who will just happen to exist when we are no longer on this earth? These are the most important questions, and we cannot we cannot hand over to them our identities, because our identities cannot affect them. We cannot hand over to them our personal success. We cannot hand to them our personal stories. We cannot hand to them our, how much we have in a bank account, bank we do not even control. We cannot hand to them our university degrees, our PhDs, our masters. We cannot hand over to them all these things because they are useless. What we can hand over to them is rather institutions of power. So the point that I'm trying to emphasize here is that Africans, we must always understand time and the situations that we are going through and think about what kind of sacrifice we can take in order to change things. We have for a long time embarked or followed suit Eurocentric thinking, whereby we always wanted to do things for ourselves. We wanted to promote ourselves, our personal identities, in forefront. We want to be known. We wanted to be acknowledged as the ones who make things happen. We want to be applauded. We want to be, followed by other people. But when we die, what is all of that gonna do? How is that gonna affect people that gonna live, the children that are gonna live in this world? Those are the very important questions. So the identity is something that is meaningful when you are existing. It's something that it can have a kind of influence when you are still alive, and when you die, your identity cannot do anything. Your identity dies with you. And actually, when you are dead, it's other people who have to decide where they are going to bury you, what kind of clothes they're going to give you, to dress you in before they bury you, what kind of coffin they have to buy for you. It's other people who are going to decide all those realities, because you are no longer able to do anything at all, you see. So that is identity. It ends with you when you are no longer able to breathe. But if you and I can come together and participate in the construction of institutions of power, because only institutions is what can change Africa. And I'm going to get to that just shortly. When we can come together and focus on the construction or in the building of institutions, we will be successful people, because institutions remains forever. When we die, institutions stay there. The other people who come after us benefit from those institutions. And I'll give you an example. Slavery lasted for more than 400 years. More than 400 years, you can imagine how many generations? Many generations. So it means people who, build the institution of slavery, the first people who came up with that idea in, I think, somewhere around 1442, when first Africans started to be deported out of Africa. The people who initiated, the people who gave motion to the institution of slavery died, because they left that institution called slave trade. Their children participated in that institutions, benefited from that institution. They, four children, and so on, until 400 years, when slavery had to be theoretically stopped or abolished. So, in other words, actually, it's very interesting to notice that the very same institution of slavery, when it's got to be abolished, it changed to become colonialism, run by the very same people, or the children of the very same people who built the institution of slavery. And when colonialism came to its end, apparently, it's transformed itself into neocolonialism. So if you can really think in terms of, years, how many this particular institution, don't worry about the name, because it can change the name, but the practice is the same. The fundamental element of the system is the same, and the philosophy is the same. And the philosophy is that of white supremacy and mistreatment of other people on the basis of their color. That is what it is. That's a fundamental element. So the institution stay forever, and the people in this generation will die. The white supremacists in this present generation will die and will hand over the very same institution of white supremacy or racism to their children, who, if we Africans do not really act quickly and effectively, our children will be also the victims of the children of the current racist and white supremacists. Why? Because they've come up with institutions. Institutions are powerful, you know. You know today about the reserve banks that we use all over the world, but do you know any, you know maybe 10 people that are behind the reserve banks? Because one thing for sure that we cannot disagree is that most of reserve banks that we use in our countries are private entities. In case you didn't know that, you can do your research. Starting from the U.S. Reserve Bank is private controlled entity. Coming to our central banks are all private entities. But who are the people running behind those things? Do you know them? Most of you don't know them because they didn't push their identities in forefront, but they built institutions. They are managing institutions, institutions that are colonizing you and me today. So why are you struggling to be known? Why are you really struggling to be the only one? Why do you want to make everything only about yourself? And if it's not about you, it doesn't make sense. No. If we really want to change Africa, this is time that we have to just a little bit try to give up on the personal, personal gain, especially the promotion of personal identity, and promote the idea of building strong constitutions, because Africa will change through constitutions. Through institutions and institutions of power. We have institutions today that have been built by other people, institutions through which those other people are deciding on the price of African raw materials. As you know, Africa does not decide at which price we have to sell our crude oil, at which price we have to sell our diamonds, our gold. These things, or these prices, are fixed by the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is institution built by your oppressor and my oppressor. And they define the world dynamics through those institutions. Until we come up with institutions of power, we will never gonna be able to change the reality and the paradigm of African people. Institutions are more important than identities. And to finish, I want to state something very important. Get ready for our book, the Free-Minded book. It's going to be released shortly, and it's going to be the study material of our training program for the African future leaders in politics and in business. So get ready. The book is going to be released soon, and get ready to have your copy. It's going to be a powerful book. So one thing that I just want to say before I depart, very quickly. As I said, when we go through the Eurocentric institutions, educational system, mostly we are taught about self-gain, self profit, self-identity, and stuff like that. You study, you get a degree, you get your PhD, you get your master, or whatever else that you can get, and you get a good job, you live in a suburb, you get a good car, you get a good, all those things around yourself, self-happiness. Even though you cannot control the situations around you, even if you don't control your economy, your politics, but it's all about you. That's the idea we have been sold. You see, but one thing is this: we cannot change our society with a good job. We cannot change our society with a good neighborhood or good suburb. We cannot change our society with, good salary. We cannot change our society with a good education given by European people. We can only change our society with policy. Did you get that? Policy is what defines what society is going to become. It's not a good job. Because the person who gives you that good job, tomorrow he can change the policy and take that job away from you, and you stay in the same situation that you were prior you get that job. And every time African politicians come into our neighborhoods and tell us that we must elect them because they will bring investors, investors who will come to invest in our communities so that they can give us job. Those African politicians are traitors, and they have to be treated like enemies because they are not contributing to our success and to the true development of Africa that we need. Because Africa as society cannot change by investors coming to bring good job. As I said, you cannot change your society with a good job, with the money, or with your degree. We can only change our society with policy, because we are mostly running to get all these things for personal gain, but we don't even question about who actually defined the policy that is ruling our nation, who amend the law that are, the law that is ruling our nation, that is ruling our life, who define, who states, who change what, policy, law, regulations that define, that change, that influence, that affect, and that impact our daily lives. That is where we change the society. In order for us as African people to change our society, we must embark in an endeavor that give us the power to amend the policy and to affect the policy and to amend the law and to have a decision, briefly speaking, to have a decision on what kind of policy should be amended in Africa or in our community, and what is that policy can bring as a result. But if we have to sit down for other people to make policies or policy or regulations over our lives and apply those policies to us, we are just victims of decisions made for by other people. And if we feel like we have no interest in being involved in the policy that defines our nations or our society as African society, then we have just made peace with our own chains. And in this case, they are only psychological chains. So, to state it differently, what I'm trying to say is that your education is good, your history is necessary, your religion is necessary, your political party that you vote for, that you elect every year or after 4 years, whatever, is necessary. Your job that you're doing is necessary. Your salary that sustains your life is very necessary. Your good neighborhood where you're living is very necessary for you. However, our society, our lives cannot change until we embark in the politics of our liberation, or we can remain enjoying the politics of our oppression. Thank you very much. Peace and power to you, Black family, wherever you happen to be following us today. It's our weekly show. We have missed it for, I think, 4 or 5 weeks. We couldn't have a chance to come up and have this kind of discussion that we normally had every week. So today, it's a great opportunity that we have been given today to come and discuss, have this kind of thought-provoking discussion, so that you can, when you go, just sit down and begin to think about, what is important in your life or in our life as African people. Is it institutions of power, or is just self-identity as me and you? When we die, identity die with us. So please tune in tonight, this evening, for our training session with the Free-Minded Academy, which is a Pan-African academy for African future leaders in politics and business. We are starting today a rollout of training regarding the ideology of the ACUP. You need to know exactly what is the ACUP ideology before you even get in touch with the ACUP, before even you understand what we are doing. If you don't know the ideology, sometimes you can get frustrated about what we do because you don't understand exactly what is the ideology of this part. So we will explain to you and we will train you to understand this ideology and to become also an agent of transformation in your own society. And moreover, this is just a kind of pre-training. It's not a sole purpose of the Free-Minded Academy. Free-Minded Academy has been built or has been brought into existence for one single purpose: to transform and to create a new class of African leadership in these two areas, politics and business. Leaders in politics and business. When we have leaders who have no knowledge of politics, but they only too much in the business. Those are the people who can sell Africa tomorrow, because what politics does, it gives you ideology and a sense of selfness and a sense of of beingness and a sense of who you are. The true political activity should be aiming to achieve that in your life. And when you have people that are only politically inclined and have no clue of the business world, it results in a society that is over indebted, where you make good political projects, but for you to get those projects implemented, you have to run in Europe to get loan for you to implement your projects, which is the disaster of today's Africa. So, with the free-minded, we look at Africa differently. Leaders in politics and business. And when we create these new leaders, we are hopeful that Africa, of tomorrow will be different from Africa that we've experienced. Peace and power to you again, Black family. Hopefully we'll meet with you tonight for from actually not just today but also next Saturday, and for the next 5 Saturdays we'll be having the training in the Free Minded Academy. So thank you very much for being with us today, and hopeful to the next session again of discussion, probably next Saturday. And for me, my name is King Kabbalah, a member of ACUP, and I say peace and power to you all. Stay tuned. There's more coming. Thank you.